She stormed out of her SUV the moment she saw me step onto the porch. "You can't be here!" she shouted, her voice sharp enough to echo off the pine-covered slopes. I didn't even drop the duffel bag from my shoulder. I just stared at her, confused but calm. "Pretty sure this is still my cabin," I said, unlocking the door that hadn't been touched since last winter. Karen marched right up to the steps, holding a clipboard like it was a badge. "This entire valley is under our HOA now. You left for 2 years, you forfeited your rights. You need to leave before I call security." I almost laughed, but her eyes were so wild, it stopped me. I'd grown up here. My dad built this cabin himself. I came back after years overseas to find the trees thicker, the air cleaner. And now some woman claiming she owned it all? "Call whoever you want," I said, pushing the door open. "But you better have proof you own even an inch of this land." Her lips curled. "We'll see about that." She turned, barking into her phone. "Get the patrol down here now!" I stepped inside, expecting dust and silence. Instead, I found a bright red notice stapled to the inside of the door. "Property seized. HOA board decision." That's when I knew this wasn't just a welcome home misunderstanding. Before I could pull it down, 2 men in matching jackets showed up at the driveway, one holding what looked like a citation pad. Karen pointed at me as if she'd just caught a trespasser. "There he is, the squatter. Remove him." I stayed leaning against the doorway, trying to keep my voice steady. "You sure you want to do that? Because before you embarrass yourself, you should know I own not just this cabin, but every acre of the valley you're standing on." Karen froze for a half second, then burst out laughing like I'd told a bad joke. "You own the valley? Nice try." I didn't smile. "Nice try" was when you thought no one would come back to check your paperwork. Her face lost that fake smile for the first time. The men looked at each other, suddenly unsure whose orders they were supposed to follow. And in that awkward silence, the mountain breeze pushed the red notice off the doorframe, fluttering it to the porch steps. "This isn't over," she muttered, snatching it up. "You're right. It's just starting." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of an engine idling outside the cabin. When I pulled the curtain back, Karen's silver SUV was parked at the edge of the dirt road again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. A county deputy's cruiser sat behind her, lights off, but presence heavy. I stepped onto the porch with a coffee mug in hand, keeping my face calm. Karen stood beside the deputy, talking fast and pointing at my cabin like she was reporting a crime scene. The deputy approached me first. "Sir, I'm responding to a complaint about unlawful occupation of HOA property. Can I see some ID?" I handed it over without a word. Karen crossed her arms with a smirk, already picturing me in cuffs. "Look, I've got no problem showing paperwork, but before we go any further, you should know this land isn't under any HOA jurisdiction. I can prove it." Karen jumped in before he could reply. "That's a lie! The board annexed this whole valley last year. He's just a drifter who came back to squat." I went inside, opened an old metal box my dad left behind, and brought out a thick envelope. I placed it gently on the porch rail. "This is the original deed, signed by the county registrar in 1974. It includes the entire valley, Riverbend to the ridge." The deputy flipped through the documents, his brows tightening. Karen stepped closer, craning her neck to read, her smirk slipping inch by inch. That can't be right," she stammered. "Our board filed a claim." "Filing a claim isn't the same as owning. You can't take what was never for sale." The deputy looked at her, then back at me. "Sir, I don't see any violation here. Ma'am, if you have further disputes, you'll need to take it up in court." Karen's face went crimson. "You don't understand. He abandoned the property for years. That's as good as surrendering it." I shook my head slowly. "You should have done your homework before you started stapling fake seizure notices on my door." For a moment, no one spoke. The deputy handed back my ID and the deed, then got back into his cruiser. Karen stayed planted on the dirt road, gripping her clipboard so tight her knuckles turned white. As the deputy drove off, she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You think you've won, but you don't know who you're up against." I leaned on the porch rail, sipping my coffee, knowing this wasn't her last move. The quiet valley suddenly felt like a battlefield, and I had no doubt the next attack wouldn't come with a warning. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun slipped behind the ridge, trying to figure out why Karen was so desperate for this valley. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. A deep voice came through, calm but clipped. "You don't know me, but you need to check the creek line by your southern fence, tonight, before midnight." The call ended before I could ask a single question. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the narrow path. The woods were quiet except for the stream. When I reached the creek, I saw fresh tire tracks in the mud and something glinting in the water. A chain-linked marker stake. It had the HOA's logo burned into it. Someone had been surveying my land in secret. I was still staring at the marker when I heard twigs snapping behind me. I spun around, beam from the flashlight catching a man in dark work clothes, frozen mid-step like a deer caught in headlights. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice low. "You lost?" He didn't answer, just bolted into the trees. I chased him for a few yards, but stopped when I realized he was heading straight toward the valley road. A truck engine started in the distance and roared away. By the time I got back to the cabin, a pair of headlights was pulling up the drive. My heart clenched until I recognized the old Ford. It was Mason, my father's friend and the previous caretaker of the land. He stepped out with a cautious smile. "Heard you came back. Figured I better warn you. Karen's board has been sniffing around this valley for months. They say there's oil under the ridge. They've been trying to scare folks off so they can drill." That explained the sudden interest in a patch of land they once ignored. Before I could respond, we both noticed something strange. A drone hovering above the tree line, its red light blinking as it circled the cabin. Mason muttered, "That's not the county's." I grabbed a long branch and hurled it upward. I missed, but the drone zipped off into the night. Mason looked at me grimly. "They're watching you now. I'd bet my hat tonight won't be the last stunt they pull." Inside, I spread the old land deeds and maps across the table, Mason leaning over them with me. I noticed a sealed letter tucked between the papers, addressed to me in my father's handwriting. My chest tightened as I opened it. The note was short. "If anyone ever challenges your right to this valley, show them the second deed. It's hidden in the cabin wall behind the fireplace." I glanced at Mason. "Looks like Dad left us a trump card." We moved the old stones of the fireplace until we found a metal box, heavier than I expected. Inside was another folded document, stamped with an official county seal, newer than the first deed, and it named me as sole owner of every mineral right beneath the valley. Mason let out a low whistle. "Son, you just found their worst nightmare." I smiled, but it faded quickly when I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. Tires rolling up slow. I grabbed the rifle I kept by the door, not to use, just to make whoever was outside think twice. Mason killed the cabin lights with a quick flick of the switch, and we both crouched low near the window. Through the moonlight, we saw 2 pickup trucks stopping by the gate. 4 men stepped out. One of them was the same guy I had seen at the creek. Karen climbed out last, wearing a heavy coat, her face lit by the headlights. She marched up the drive like she owned the night. "Come out," she yelled. "This doesn't have to get ugly. We're here to remove you before sunrise." I opened the door just enough to be seen. "Karen, you've already trespassed once. Turn around before you stack up charges you can't talk your way out of." She laughed, but it was hollow. "You're bluffing. You don't have what it takes to fight us." I stepped out onto the porch, holding the metal box with the second deed. "You're right. I don't have to fight you. The law already did."
I tossed the deed onto the porch rail so the moonlight caught the county seal. Mineral rights. Every drop of oil under this valley is mine by court record. Your board's got nothing. Her smile faltered, but she waved her hand at the men behind her. Take him off the property. Mason stepped forward then, holding up his phone. You touch him, and this live stream goes straight to the sheriff. They're already on the line. Right on cue, red and blue lights appeared far down the road, growing brighter as the real deputies came up the hill. Karen spun around, her men suddenly backing away like the ground had turned to glass. 2 deputies got out, one of them the same who'd come that morning. He looked tired but determined. Ma'am, step away from the porch. You and your men are under investigation for trespassing, unlawful surveillance, and attempted fraud. Karen tried to argue, pointing at me. He's lying. That deed's a fake. The deputy cut her off. The county recorder's office verified it an hour ago. We had a call about a drone over private property. You crossed a line. One of the men dropped the clipboard they had been carrying and raised his hands. The others followed suit. Karen froze, staring at me with a mix of rage and disbelief as the deputies guided her to the cruiser. As they drove off with her in the back seat, Mason let out a breath he'd been holding. Well, he said, that's one way to welcome yourself home. I finally felt the weight lift off my chest. The valley was quiet again, just as my dad had loved it. Before heading inside, I looked out over the moonlit hills and whispered, "You were right, Dad. Never let anyone take what you've bled for." The next morning, the county posted official notices along the road, declaring the valley protected land under my name. Word spread fast that the drilling project was over. I rebuilt the fence by the creek that afternoon while Mason fixed the porch steps. When we finished, I noticed the red notice Karen had stapled to my door lying crumpled near the woodpile. I picked it up, set it on the porch rail, and struck a match. The paper curled and blackened in the flame, a thin wisp of smoke rising into the mountain air. I smiled, knowing the valley was safe again, not just the land, but the memory of my father's promise. For the first time in years, the cabin felt like home.